Everyone laughed at this engine. A 3-cylinder, 2-stroke motor, squeezed under a tiny bonnet, producing just 38 horsepower. It ran on a mixture of oil and petrol. It coughed out blue smoke on cold mornings, and it screamed past on mountain stages sounding, according to more than one journalist who stood on the roadside to hear it, like an angry chainsaw wearing a body kit. Mercedes-Benz didn't take it seriously. Sunbeam didn't take it seriously. Almost nobody standing at the start line of the Rally of Monte Carlo in 1962 took it seriously. Then it won. And the year after that, in 1963, in conditions so brutal that nearly 2 out of every 3 cars entered never even reached the finish line, it won again. This is the story of the Saab 96. A car so light, so strange, and so laughably underpowered on paper that its own manufacturer would eventually decide its engine was an embarrassment and quietly kill it in secret. But before that happened, this so-called joke of a machine did something almost nobody expected. It beat the biggest names in motorsport twice on the most prestigious rally stage on Earth. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a company that used to build fighter planes turned an underpowered oddity into one of the most feared cars in European rallying, and why what happened to it afterward still feels, to the people who lived through it, like a quiet betrayal. Stick with me, because the middle of this story is where it gets uncomfortable. To understand why the Saab 96 even existed, you have to go back further than most people expect. Saab didn't start out building cars at all. The company was founded as Svenska Aeroplan Aktiebolag in the years leading up to the Second World War to build fighter aircraft for the Swedish Air Force. Sweden stayed neutral through the war, but it kept building warplanes anyway, just in case neutrality wasn't enough to save it. That's the environment the company came from. Precision, aero, dynamics. The kind of engineering where a mistake doesn't dent a bumper, it kills a pilot. When the war ended, Saab had a factory full of aircraft engineers and no more aircraft to build. So, in 1947, they showed the press something strange, a small, bulbous little car designed by an aircraft engineer, with a drag coefficient that would have embarrassed some sports cars decades later. That car became the Saab 92. It evolved into the Saab 93. And in 1960, it evolved again into the car this story is really about, the Saab 96. On paper, the 96 had almost nothing going for it against the giants of the era. Under the bonnet sat that same strange inheritance from the 93, an 841 cubic centimeter, 3-cylinder, 2-stroke engine, producing 38 horsepower in standard form. 2-stroke engines were already considered old-fashioned technology by the 1960s in most of the automotive world. You had to mix oil into the fuel. You got smoke. You got that buzzing, wasp-like engine note instead of a proper rumble. It was the kind of engine you found in a chainsaw or an outboard motor, not a car meant to compete with Mercedes-Benz and Porsche. But the people at Saab knew something the rest of the industry hadn't fully worked out yet. Weight matters more than power on a rally stage, and the Saab 96 weighed next to nothing. Depending on the version, you were looking at somewhere around 870 kilograms, or roughly 1,900 pounds. That's featherweight, even by the standards of small cars from that era. Combine that with front-wheel drive, which very few of its rivals had, and you had a car that could claw its way through snow, ice, and gravel while heavier, more powerful. Rear-wheel drive machines were sliding helplessly off the road. There was another advantage hiding inside that aircraft heritage, one most rivals never fully understood until it was too late. The Saab 92, and everything that descended from it, had been shaped by an aircraft designer named Sixten Säsen, the same man who later styled the 93, the 96, and eventually the 99. His obsession with smooth, rounded surfaces wasn't just about looking modern, it genuinely cut drag. Independent road tests from the period praised the 96 for a stability at speed that most saloon cars of the era simply couldn't match, with more than one reviewer describing the ride as limousine-like even at 70 miles an hour. On a rally stage, that stability meant a tired driver, hours into the night, could hold the car steady through a fast section where a twitchier competitor would be fighting the wheel the whole way. Lightness got the Saab through the slow, technical corners. Aerodynamic stability kept it composed on the fast ones. Together, that was a combination almost nobody else on the grid had thought to engineer on purpose. There was still one problem. A light, front-wheel drive car with a smoky little two-stroke engine needed a driver who was willing to push it past what looked sensible on paper. It needed someone slightly unhinged. It found him. His name was Erik Carlsson, a big man, well over 6 feet tall, built more like a rugby forward than a rally driver, folded uncomfortably into a car that seemed built for somebody half his size. Carlsson drove the Saab 96 the way you'd expect a man with nothing to lose to drive it, flat out, all the time, corners be damned. He earned a nickname that followed him for the rest of his career, Carlsson på taket, Carlsson on the roof. He got that name because he rolled his car so often, mid-corner, that spectators started to believe it was part of his technique rather than a mistake. He'd roll the 96 through a full revolution, land back on its wheels without lifting off the throttle, and keep going. The little two-stroke engine still buzzing at the exact same pitch the whole way through, as if nothing had happened at all. That combination, a driver with no fear and a car with almost nothing to lose, started producing results almost immediately. In 1960, Carlsson won the RAC Rally of Great Britain, one of the toughest events on the calendar, driving the brand new 96. He backed it up by winning the RAC again the following year, in 1961, and once more in 1962. 3 RAC victories in a row, in a car that most of the paddock still considered a novelty. Here's the part that should stop you for a second. While Carlsson was busy embarrassing bigger, more expensive machinery on British soil, almost nobody outside of Scandinavia and motorsport circles had heard of Saab as anything other than an aircraft company that also, apparently, made odd little cars. That was about to change completely, because winning the RAC Rally, tough as it was, wasn't the event that made the automotive world sit up. The event that did that was 600 miles away, on the icy mountain roads above the French Riviera. Before we get there, if you're the kind of person who genuinely appreciates stories like this, ones that dig past the marketing and into what actually happened on the road, do me a favor and hit subscribe. This channel exists to keep pulling these stories out of the archives, the ones that deserve to be remembered properly. And if something in this video jogs a memory of your own, an old Saab, an old two-stroke, a family member who swore by one of these things, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this is landing for you, give it a like. And if you know someone who'd appreciate a story like this, send it their way. Now, back to the mountains above Monte Carlo. The Rally of Monte Carlo has always been the one that matters most. Every major manufacturer wanted to win it, because a win there didn't just prove your car was fast, it proved your car could survive ice, fog, hairpin switchbacks, and sleep-deprived drivers pushing through the night, all at once. In January of 1962, Erik Carlsson lined up his underpowered, unglamorous, 38 horsepower Saab 96 against factory teams running far more powerful machinery. Second place that year went to Eugen Beringer, driving a Mercedes-Benz 220 SE, a car with vastly more power and a manufacturer with vastly more prestige. Third place went to Paddy Hopkirk in a Sunbeam Rapier. First place went to the Saab, to the two-stroke joke engine nobody took seriously. Erik Carlsson had just won the Monte Carlo Rally. Think about what that actually meant inside the paddock the next morning. Teams with budgets many times the size of Saab's entire competition department had just been beaten by a car that, on a spec sheet, shouldn't have finished in the top 10, let alone first. Journalists who had spent years mocking two-stroke technology suddenly had to explain how a chainsaw with a windscreen had just outlasted and outdriven some of the most respected marques in Europe. Saab's competition department wasn't some sprawling factory operation either. According to people who worked inside it at the time, the whole rally program was run on a fraction of what its rivals spent, a handful of mechanics and drivers who compensated for money they didn't have, with preparation nobody else bothered with. Most people, would have called that a fluke. One good year, one bad set of weather that happened to suit a light front-wheel drive car, one lucky break. The following year, 1963, put that theory to death permanently. The 1963 Monte Carlo Rally is remembered as one of the harshest editions in the event's history. Roads turned to sheet ice. Conditions were so severe that of roughly 296 cars that started the event, only around 100 made it to the finish. Nearly 2 out of every 3 entrants were eliminated by the mountains themselves before they ever got the chance to lose to another driver. This wasn't a race anymore. It was closer to survival. Erik Carlsson went into that carnage with a new co-driver beside him, Gunnar Palm, and the same 2-stroke engine everybody still quietly mocked. And once again, when the ice, the fog, and the mountain roads had finished eliminating almost everyone else, it was the little Saab that crossed the line first. Second place went to Pauli Toivonen, driving a Citroën ID 19, a car that dwarfed the Saab in both size and reputation. Third place went to Rauno Aaltonen in a Mini, the very car that was about to take over rallying for the rest of the decade. Back-to-back Monte Carlo victories, 1962 and 1963. The same underpowered, oil-burning, chainsaw-sounding engine that had been a punchline 2 years earlier had just beaten Mercedes, beaten Citroën, and outsurvived nearly the entire field of professional rally teams, twice. There's a detail from that period that rarely makes it into the official histories, but it says everything about who Erik Carlsson actually was off the stage. In 1963, the same year of his second Monte Carlo win, he married Pat Moss. If that surname sounds familiar, it should. Pat Moss was the sister of Sterling Moss, one of the most celebrated racing drivers Britain has ever produced, and she was a formidable rally competitor in her own right, having driven for Saab herself. 2 of the toughest, most respected names in European rallying, from 2 different countries, ended up building a life together. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was 2 people who understood exactly what the other one had been through on those mountain roads, and who probably couldn't have explained that to anyone who hadn't lived it. Carlsson didn't stop at Monte Carlo. In the years that followed, he took the 96 even further afield, campaigning it on the East African Safari Rally, one of the most punishing endurance events on the calendar, where heat, dust, and thousands of miles of unpaved roads destroyed cars that had never even seen a snowflake. He also competed in the Liège-Sofia-Liège, a brutal round trip of roughly 5,000 kilometers between Belgium and Bulgaria and back again, run on public roads with almost no time allowed for rest or service. It wasn't really a rally in the traditional sense. It was closer to an endurance trial that happened to involve steering wheels. The little Saab, and the men and women who drove it, kept turning up to events that seemed designed to break both car and driver, and kept finding ways to survive them. For a few years, Saab had exactly the reputation it wanted, a scrappy, unlikely underdog that had humiliated the establishment using nothing but weight distribution, front-wheel drive traction, and a driver who refused to lift off the throttle even while rolling upside down. The company leaned into it hard. They released a special road-going version of the 96 called the Monte Carlo 850, built between 1965 and 1968, tuned up to 57 horsepower with triple carburetors and an oil injection system, so owners wouldn't have to keep mixing fuel by hand. It was a badge of honor. A way for ordinary customers to own a small piece of what Carlsson had done on those icy stages. And then, quietly, without most of the public ever being told directly, Saab decided the whole thing had to end. Here's the part that still stings for a lot of people who lived through it. By the mid-1960s, the wider automotive industry had firmly moved on from 2-stroke engines. They were dirty. They were smoky. Emissions regulations were tightening across export markets, especially in the United States, which had become an important market for Saab. A 2-stroke engine that needed oil mixed into its fuel and produced visible smoke on a cold start was becoming a liability, no matter how many rallies it had won. So Saab made a decision. They were going to replace the engine that had built the 96's entire reputation, the same engine that had beaten Mercedes-Benz and Citroën on the biggest stage in motorsport. with a completely different unit, a 1,498 cubic centimeter, 4-stroke V4 engine, originally designed by Ford for the European Taunus. A conventional, modern, 4-stroke engine with none of the smoke, none of the drama, and, frankly, none of the character. What makes this genuinely uncomfortable is how the decision was handled internally. According to accounts from people close to the project, the engine switch was kept secret within Saab itself. Only around 7 people at the company knew the change was coming, and that number reportedly didn't even include the man running the business at the time. The switch was finalized and prepared in secrecy, only about 5 months before the new V4 powered cars actually reached production. Think about that. The engine that had defined the company's identity, that had made Erik Carlsson a legend, that had turned a joke into a giant killer, was retired almost like something to be ashamed of, rather than celebrated. By 1967, the 2-stroke Saab 96 was gone from production, replaced permanently by the V4. The car itself lived on for over another decade, right through to 1980, with total production eventually reaching close to 550,000 units across its full 20-year run. But the engine that actually won Monte Carlo twice, the one people had once laughed at, never came back. There's something almost poetic, in a bitter way, about how that story ends. The world didn't take the 2-stroke Saab seriously until it had already won everything there was to win. And once it had proven itself completely, the very company that built it decided it was an embarrassment worth burying quietly, rather than a legacy worth defending. Erik Carlsson himself kept driving Saabs, kept representing the brand for decades afterward, eventually becoming known simply as Mr. Saab. But the little 3-cylinder engine that made his name, the chainsaw that beat the giants, was phased out behind closed doors, its passing barely acknowledged at the time it happened. If there's a lesson buried in a story like this one, it's this. The things that get laughed at first are sometimes the very things that end up rewriting what everyone thought was possible. And the people who built them rarely get remembered the way they should be unless someone keeps telling the story properly. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Someone who wants the real story, not the sanitized version. So do me a favor, hit subscribe, so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell me what stuck with you most, the 2 Monte Carlo wins, Carlsson on the roof, or the way Saab buried its own engine in secret. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you've got a friend who'd appreciate a story like this, send it their way. I'll see you in the next one.